Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to episode 95 of Talking Asperger's with Andrew. My name's Andrew Marsh, and I'm autistic. My representation of autism is Asperger's syndrome, or as they prefer to call it in the medical diagnostic manuals, type 1 autism. Now, I don't particularly like that expression, so I'm going to refer to my condition as Asperger's syndrome on this call today. Why is that important? Well, I don't like type 1 autism because there's type 2 and there's type 3 in it. It, I prefer to identify as having Asperger's syndrome. It's a term that I prefer to use for me, and that's what I'm going to use to refer to it. And on my webinars, what I do is I have some handy tips and strategies and ideas and things that can help employers better manage people like me, autistic people, people with Asperger's syndrome in their business. How do I do that? Well, I've had 59 years of lived experience of having Asperger's, although I've only known for the last 8 years. I was diagnosed when I was 51. But I've developed my own ways of coping in a work environment and in groups with people, friends, family, and so on. And part of that was muddling through, part of that was making mistakes, part of that was finding ways to help myself in an employment situation. And other ways are things that I now think employers could be doing, perhaps should be doing, to help properly engage with their Asperger's and their autistic employees to get the best out of them. Because ultimately, that's what a business is for. If you can get the best out of your employees, you're likely to be more successful, more profitable, and everyone wins. You then cascade that reward down through to the staff as well as to the board. So that's what I do. I work with employers to help them better manage people like me, autistic people, people with Asperger's syndrome in their business. I have a 7 steps program that I go through with them, and I adapt that according to their needs, how they do what they do in business, how they set up their communication channels and the like. So it's a flexible thing so that I can tailor my solutions to the business needs. And that's what I do. And I also want to be able to help autistic people to help themselves. What can they do to help themselves? Because there are things that we can all do to help ourselves at work. If we're not getting clear instruction, then ask for clarification. Send an email saying, "I'm not clear on what you wanted. Can you please clarify?" Things of that nature. So on to today's topic. Today's topic's an interesting one because it's very often overlooked. It's certainly misunderstood, and if not understood and not appreciated as to where it's coming from the autistic person, can get them into trouble at work, for example, or in groups. And it's what I call, or what we call, filters, or actually the lack of filters. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay, let's take a very simple example. And I'm going to try not to be sexist here. A very simple example. Your wife walks in and says, "I've bought this new dress. What do you think?" The autistic person goes, "Oh, it doesn't really fit you properly round there." That's not the response your wife was expecting. The autistic person has given their honest opinion, but they've given it bluntly, without thought for the consequences of that opinion on how that other person is going to receive that information. And in that situation, the wife or girlfriend is going to be very unhappy if their male partner or their partner says, "Don't like it, doesn't really suit you well." That could be a source of conflict. In the workplace, it can be about all sorts of things. You can, if someone, and I was guilty of this. I said guilty. This was something that happened to me. Guilty is perhaps the wrong terminology to use. But if someone said something, "Andrew, what do you think about this?" Boom, I would give them my answer, and they go, "Ooh," sharp intake of breath, and like, "Ooh, didn't expect that from you, Andrew." What? You asked for my opinion. Now I have learned through bitter experience of people with that expression, and I'm not very good at reading expressions, but if someone has a, "Oh, don't like that," and they get agitated and angry, and they can get very affronted by what you've said. I have learned through bitter experience that that isn't necessarily the right way to say what you meant to say. I don't necessarily know what the right way is to say it, but we'll come to that. So this not having filters is someone asks an autistic person a question, bam, they give their answer. They give their honest opinion. Doesn't matter whether they think the other person's going to like it or not. That's my opinion. 2 and 2 = 4. Boom, there's your answer. And we've then got to deal with the response from the person who's asked the question. Did you like the proposal I put together for that new client? No, I thought it was dreadful. You missed out, boom, boom, boom. And you over elaborated on point X, Y, and Z. And I would have done it differently. Oh, wow. That person on the receiving end of that is going to get very defensive. Let's be honest. If you're asked something by someone who's obviously up, they're very excited about the new dress they've worn or the proposal they put together, and you, bam, you knock it down straight away with it. No, I didn't like it because of X, Y, and Z. That person is going to get defensive. And defensive people can get very withdrawn, or they can be right in your face. What do you mean by that? And they can get very emotionally engaged in the response. And I've learned by getting it wrong, getting it spectacularly wrong, to try and tone things down a bit. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I remember one occasion when I first started being work as a geologist. We had to do some weekend work. There'd been a problem on a construction site, and they were doing weekend work to catch up to fix the problem. My boss said to me on Friday, Andrew, I need you to do this on the weekend. Yep, okay, no problem, fine. All sorted. Went out, did the weekend's work, kept copious notes, loads of notes. And then when I got back to the office, I wrote a memo. I need to let you know that this was in 1987. This was before we had computers at work. The only things of anything like that was a word processor that the typing pool and the secretaries used to do letters and reports. So if you wanted a memo, you wrote it out on memo paper and you put it in a distribution basket for whoever it was that was getting it and who was getting a copy. So I'd written this report, this memo of everything that had happened, the good, the bad, and the ugly on site. This happened. This person said this person said that. The whole story, the full 9 yards. It was about a 7 or 8 page memo. So I'm sitting, it's taken me, most of the morning to write this thing up. Anyway, in the afternoon, the project manager, who happened to be on the floor below me, in the design office below us, he literally, I saw him come through the door, and he was huffing and puffing with this piece of paper, this paper in his hand. And he comes up to me and he goes, have you read this report? And I looked at him and said, read it? I wrote it. Oh, what do you mean by this? What about that? And he was so involved in that report, in the memo that I sent. It was like he wanted to know the ins and outs of the hind leg of a donkey, and he was absolutely wanted to know what happened here, what happened there. And we had a conversation that lasted far longer than it needed to, because I had written a warts and all blunt report on what happened, who said what happened, what we did about it, was I happy with the end result, and all of those sorts of things. Oh, but it was the look on his face. And like I said, I'm not very good at reading facial expressions and body language, but the look on his face when he came through the door, huffing and puffing because he'd just run up the stairs, I got that he read something and he was very interested in knowing what had happened. Have you read this report? Yeah, I read it. I wrote it. And it was like, oh. So understanding the impact of what we say bluntly, what an autistic person would say bluntly to what might seem to be a perfectly innocuous question. Someone does something at work, they've done some calculations and they've made a mistake. You check the calculations, oh, you made a mistake. Several ways of doing that. You could sidle up to the person and say, hi, I got your just checked your calculations. You've made a mistake. Or you could go, these are wrong. Bam, thump them down on the desk and walk away. Not a way to endear yourself to your colleagues. Or you could say, I found a mistake on page 3 of the calculations. You should have done this and you did that. That response that you have, you need to try and make proportionate to the question. And it is so difficult for autistic people to get that right because we just don't know. If someone comes up and asks me a question, boom, I'll give you the answer. There's not that pause moment of how do I tactfully respond to this question when you know the answer is no, it's rubbish. You have to be a little more diplomatic than saying no, it's rubbish. Again, I have learned through bitter experience being pulled up by managers saying, Andrew, you can't say that. Why not? Why can't I say that? It's right. What I've said is right. Yeah, it's not that you're right. It's the way you're saying it. You need to be more diplomatic. You need to tone it down a bit. And the number of times I have found myself in my boss's office getting addressing down because my tone wasn't deemed to be acceptable for the audience that I presented it to or I made comment to. This was all in the day before I knew I had autism, by the way. This was long before. I had my whole geological career in the construction industry long before I knew I had Asperger's syndrome. Always knew I was different and had trouble fitting in and all of those things, but my bosses and my employers and my colleagues didn't know. They just thought, oh, Andrew. What are we going to do about Andrew? The number of times I have overheard people say, what are we going to do about Andrew on this project? I don't know. Why don't you ask Andrew? Ask him what you want and talk to him about it. Because that's the only way that you're going to get to the bottom of something, is to talk to the person. Say, noticed you did this. Wasn't thinking that wasn't necessarily the best way to respond. So I've had some of those edges knocked off me by colleagues and bosses and people I've worked with. And yet, on the other hand, this is where the conflict and the contradiction of all of things about life really confuse autistic people. On the other hand, when I had got some experience, quite a number of years experience, people would actually start to come to me and say, Andrew, I need your honest answer about this. What do you think about this? And I'd say, boom, no filter, bam, there's my answer. Yeah, I thought so. I didn't like it either. Okay, I'll find a way to express that to the client or to the other person in the team, and we'll deal with it that way. But thanks, I appreciate your honesty. And people would seek me out because I could give them my blunt, honest answer because I'd had the experience and I understood what was going on and I understood the pluses, the pros and cons of different approaches, different things happening. I could do that. So when I had experience, people would come to me and say, what do you think about this? And then I was more comfortable being blunt because it's a colleague wanting to know what I thought about so that they could then take that on board and go forward with it, presenting that to the other party, whether that's a director, a client, or whatever the situation was on site. So that was actually very useful in my career, later on in my career, when people would say, not sure about something, let's go and ask Andrew. Yeah, let's go and ask Andrew. I didn't necessarily always have the answer or the answer they expected, obviously, because no one's ever going to get everything right. But that experience position gave me the confidence to be able to say those things in the way that I did to help other people find a solution or to be involved in finding a solution to a problem that has happened on site or a problem with a design or whatever the situation was. So that's the opposite side of having no filters, is actually we need someone to give us an honest opinion on this. Let's go and ask Andrew. And they would say, Andrew, I want your honest opinion on this. Tell me what you think. And it might be I'll need to go and sit down and read through all the information they've given me and come back to them in an hour or two. Or it might be straightforward question. We've got this situation happening. What do you think? Oh, you don't want to do it like that because X, Y, and Z is going to happen. You should be doing this. This is the better way of doing that. Great, thanks. And off they would go. So that conflict or that difference of opinion about expressing yourself confuses the heck out of autistic people with Asperger's syndrome, because on one hand, you give them the honest answer and you get an intense response, an unsatisfactory response, or someone who's not happy with your response, and they can get up. Their energy goes up. They get potentially aggressive. They get argumentative, and then on the other hand, more experienced. Let's go and seek out. Let's find what Andrew thinks about this. Yes, that's what we needed to do, and they'll then take that away and go and deal with that in their own way. So understanding how all of those things work is very complicated to autistic people. We just don't get it. And like I said, been pulled up by my boss many times in my early career. Andrew, we need to have a talk about this. And we'd go away and find an office, or my boss, it was my boss's boss, and it was in his office. I need to talk to you about this. This didn't go down too well when you said it. What? What did I do? But you said this. I said, yes, but that was right. Well, technically it was right, but it was the way you said it. You got someone's back up about that. They got very defensive. They weren't very happy about it. I said, but did I say something that was wrong? Well, no, but it's the way you said it. I said, what do you want me to say? Don't know. I don't know how to do that. Don't know how to do that in the right way that you think is acceptable. And so these conflicting situations that we get all the time in work, with people, in groups, how do you do that? And autistic people struggle with not knowing how to do that, how to answer in the way that the person who's asked the question is going to receive it well. It's very difficult for us to gauge that because we're not good at gauging facial expressions, body language. And if someone has taken the time to seek me out and ask for my opinion, I'll give it to them. Unless this is one way around it. This is when you know that someone is autistic, this is one of the things that your boss or your supervisor can do when they come to you and say, Andrew, I'd like you to think about your answer before you give it to me. And I want you to try and view that, how we could move that forward by taking that to the client or taking that to the other team member. How can we do that diplomatically? How can we lessen the blow of what you're saying without changing what you're saying as being the right way to do it? How can we lessen that blow to do that? So that if they preface what they're saying like that, they're making me think, to make me say, okay, they don't want the boom in your face, warts and all. They want me to tone it down a bit. So we're having that conversation. We find the answer, the right way to do it, or they get my honest opinion. But I've tried to tone it down, and we've gauged the language that we use in putting that to the third party. So that's one of the things that an employer can do, a supervisor, a manager can do when asking for an opinion of an autistic person. Say, I want you to think about this for a little while before you answer. I want you to think about how how that will be received by others. Oh, excuse me just a moment. And what words, what form of words we can use to get our point across in the right way without coming across as being too hard or too aggressive. So that's one way that a manager can address that with their autistic employees, is to preface what they're saying by saying, I want you to take the time to think about how we can find the right words, the right form of words to put this forward, to take it forward. So have a think about that. That's one way of doing it. And that can work. That will give the autistic person think, okay, I've been told to think about it. The difficulty might come when the thinking time, the processing time, becomes a little bit of time. And when someone says to me, I want you to think about it, I might sit there for 2 or 3 minutes and not say anything. I am not ignoring you. I am absolutely not ignoring you. I am processing what is going on in my head, which is going at 90 million miles an hour, picking out 10 scenarios with 20 different outcomes each, trying to process all of that to fathom out the way or the best 2 or 3 options to deal with the problem that you've asked me about. And that takes a bit of processing time. So if we do it like this, maybe that happens, and that's a consequence. Do we want to go for that? So all of those if, buts, and whys, and what happens whens is going on in the autistic person's mind as they do what you've asked them to do. Take the time to think about it before you respond. So that might mean 2 or 3 minutes of nothing from the autistic person. And to the other person, that can seem like an eternity. And this happens at interviews. If you're interviewing an autistic person or someone with Asperger syndrome, and you've gone through, this is the role, this is the job, this is the nature of the business we're in, this is the specifics of the role. Do you have any questions? Your autistic candidate could just sit there and not say anything for a minute or 2 or 3. They're not ignoring you. They are processing all the things you've said about the business, how it runs, how the department runs, what the various sections of the business are, what the role is, what the nature of the role is, what the daily duties are, who you report to, who you respond to, how you do this, how you do that, your experience is a good match, etc., etc. They're processing all of that to ask questions. The interesting thing about that interview situation is the autistic person, the person with Asperger syndrome, might well ask a question you've never even considered before, because they're doing all up there, processing what you've said to them. And they might come out of with an absolute killer question that you think, oh, where did that come from? That's a very good question. And you've then got to think of an answer to that. So when you ask an autistic person a question and you have prefaced that by saying, I want you to take your time to think about the answer before you give me your answer, be prepared for silence. And that silence might go on for a minute or 2 or 3. They're not ignoring you. They're processing. They're thinking about what you have just said. They are thinking about the things they read up about your business on the internet, because we can all do that now. We can search, we can look at your website, we can see what you do, we can see if you've got testimonials on your website from customers or clients. We can see how the business is laid out, things on your website. You may have case studies, project case studies on your website. They might have looked at that in a great deal of detail, and they might go, yeah, on that project you did, you put on your website, how did you resolve this problem? Ooh, interesting question, because that might be a project that your department didn't have much influence in, but it's on your website. Your interviewee candidate might have looked at that website. They probably would have looked at your website and seen the structure of your board. I occasionally look up my former colleagues. I know it's something that I do. What's my old boss doing now? And I did. I looked up one of my old directors. What's he doing now? Because he and I left the company that we both worked for within 6 months of each other. So I thought, what's he doing now? So I looked him up, found him. There he was. He's working for a multidisciplinary environmental consultancy, which is the field that he was in. I was more geotechnical, environmental. He was more environmental. So we gelled well. We were a good fit. And I looked at their board. Because it said this is our board, and there were 12 people on their board, and all 12 people were white males between the ages of 40 and 65. There were no women on their board. There were no ethnic minorities on their board. There was no person of color on their board. And yet they had these wonderful statements on their website that they were inclusive, and they were this and they were that. Every single one of them was virtually a clone of the other person. They all looked exactly the same. White men between 40 and 65. All in the same. They had 2 suits. There was either a light grey suit or a dark grey pinstripe suit. That was it. That was their board. board, the CEO board of their business was all exactly the same type of person. Where was the woman? Where were the female representatives? How they can make some of the statements they made about their inclusivity and their diversity, and when their board is all the same type of person. Interesting. That's a bit of an aside, but what I'm saying to you is, in those situations where you have prefaced your question, whether I want you to take the time to think about it, be prepared for quiet. Be prepared for the autistic person to sit there in silence while they think about their answer. Think about processing what you've said to them. Then they might come up with a killer question. So filters, we really struggle. Autistic people and people with Asperger's syndrome really struggle with filters. I can still get things spectacularly wrong. Even now, even after knowing I have Asperger's for the last 8 years, I can still get things spectacularly wrong by saying the wrong thing, by saying without thinking. Andrew, do you think about this? Boom, boom, bam. Ooh, didn't expect that response, and you then get uh, a higher energy response from the person that's asked the question. So, and we can still get that wrong. So it's really important when you work with autistic people and people who have Asperger's syndrome to be very specific about what you ask them and how you ask them. Be clear that you want to say, I want you to think about it. I want you to take your time before you answer. And if you need to say that every time you ask an autistic person or someone with Asperger's syndrome a question, then that's what you need to do, because you're then prompting them to think so that they can try to gauge the answer in the terms that is more acceptable to the person who's asked the question. Won't get it right all the time, but you're giving yourself a better chance of understanding, of the autistic person understanding the question and how you wish them to respond. So filters is I remember a colleague, and I have no idea whether he was neurotypical or neurodivergent, had written a report. We were doing it was a rock slope stability project, and he had decided that, having done the analysis, it was quite urgent that this piece of work, remedial works, was done quickly. And he wrote in his report, it is recommended that this work is done now. He got pulled up by the director. You can't say now. You can say as a matter of urgency, but you can't say now. So he had to change the wording of the report. But I liked his forwardness by saying, you must do this now, which I thought was fantastic. Excuse me. So it's not necessarily just people who are neurodivergent that can fall foul of terminology. This chap said, yeah, this work must be done now. I like that. I really liked that when he told me about it. That was quite funny. But he was right. The remedial works needed to be carried out as a matter of urgency. Otherwise, this big lumber rock could fall on the house. You know, if you've got a big lump of rock that could fall on your house, you don't want to be in the house if the big lump of rock falls on your house. So the context of why he said this work needs to be done now was absolutely on the ball. But the director felt he just rephrased that slightly. So they had to change the wording of that to be done as a matter of urgency rather than this work needs to be done now. So that's just a very simple example of blunt, forthright response that needed to be toned down while still getting the same message across. Like I said, I don't know whether my colleague was neurotypical or neurodivergent. It's not relevant, because we can all fall foul of that. You know, there are some people I've worked with that I'm pretty certain were not neurotypical, that were not neurodivergent. They were neurotypical people, and they were very blunt. They were very, very blunt. Um, and it worked for them. Sometimes they got them into trouble. Other times it worked. Now, on one of the sites I worked on, it was an earthworks project in the North Wales, and my director was from a different office, so I'd never met the director who was in charge of this project until he turned up on site one day, and I immediately got on with him. He was a big, solid man, and he said, "Okay, how are we getting on? What are we doing?" And he then said, "I want to know what's going on. I want you to tell me what's going on," which was, as I found out, having built up a relationship for him, that was his code of saying, "I want to know what's going on. I want to know the good stuff. I want to know the bad stuff. And I want to know what's gone wrong. I want to know how we're going to fix it and what we're doing about it. And I want you to tell me now." That was his code for tell me everything. And I did. And obviously, when I started, I was just started to explain what was happening. He would encourage me to be more detail, put more detail, tell me more, tell me more. So he was using his experience to try and extract from me what he wanted to know, so that when he came again on the next time, or because he would come once a month for the progress meetings, he would say, "Okay, Andrew, how are we getting on? What's going on?" And I would tell him, and he said, "Okay, well, fine, okay. Any problems?" "Well, actually, there was this, and this is what we did about it." "Okay, I like that. That's good. Good. You've got my phone number if you need me at any point. That's fine. Thank you. Yeah." Which was the reassurance, which was him saying to me, "If you feel you need to phone me," which is great management, because it was giving me permission without me phoning him 3 times a day to tell him what was going on. That's not what that comment was about. That was about, if something's you're really not comfortable with and you're not getting the answers you want from the others, you phone me. We'll talk about it and we'll fix it. That's what that was. That was good management. It's very good management. Then one particular time he came down and we were having some difficulties. Um, and he said, "We need to do some calculations on this. Can you do them now?" I said, "Yeah, I can do them now." "Okay." So we stood at a drawing board, and he said, "I need to know about that." Okay. Did some calculations. I knew the calculations to do. Gave him some answers. He said, "Yeah, okay, I can live with that. Yep, I can live with that. Oh, don't like that one. What can we do about that?" And we sat there, well, we stood there over this drawing board for about an hour, going through ways to resolve problems by him asking me, "What about this?" Very specific, very blunt, straightforward questions, and I would give him the answer. And I'd say, "I can live with that. Can you live with that?" "Yeah, I can live with that." And that's what we did. We clarified what the issue was. He wanted to know from a certain perspective whether what we had proposed would work. And I was the person who knew how to do the calculations, so that I said, "Yeah, I can live with that. Can you live with that?" And he goes, "Yes, no, yes, no." And we resolved the problem, so that we didn't need to involve anyone else. It was just him and I. And that's where I could be blunt. Again, I had understood how he liked to be communicated with, and we just got on with it. And he asked me the questions. I did some calculations there and then, boom, gave him the answer. And he said, "You okay with that?" "Yeah, I can live with that." And we did it like that. And it worked out very well, because he needed someone to be able to understand where he was coming from, by why he was asking what he was asking. And I was in the position, by knowing the calculations to do, to be able to give him the reassurance that what we were doing was right and was going to work, and didn't end up with a problem further down the line. Because the last thing you want to do is put a foundation in that's going to, it's a bit of a tricky one, that. And then, you know, you've built the building and the roof's on, and suddenly you've got cracks. You want to sort out your foundation before you start putting the building up. Otherwise, you're going to get cracks and settlement and problems like that. So if you can deal with that, and he knows what he needed to know. He asked me, and I told him. We sat there. We stood there at the drawing board and went through it. Brilliant. Because he was asking the questions He made me understand. He'd been able to explain to me why he needed to know the answers to these questions about settlements and bearing capacity and all these sorts of things that we were dealing with. And that was my job. That was what I did. And we were able to go through it. And so that was a situation where we understood each other. We had a rapport, which we had built up over the weeks and months, and we could just cut to the chase. It was just me and him in my porter cabin. There was no one else listening in. We didn't need to worry about anyone else listening in and other things happening. Just the two of us and a calculator and some drawings. Boom. And we sorted it out. That was where I could be open, honest, and blunt. And I could say, no, I don't like that. I wouldn't recommend doing that. And I could say that to him without him taking offense, without him going, oh, getting upset and angry and agitated about it, because he would understand where I was coming from, and likewise. So those situations, building a rapport is a great, it really helps if you've built a rapport with your colleagues and your supervisor, your manager, because that doesn't happen overnight. But once it does, and you've understood how to communicate with each other, that was the essence of that example there, is we understood how to communicate with each other in the right way to move the project forward. And that is the crux of everything in any business, whether you're neurotypical, neurodivergent, whatever the situation is. Ultimately, a business succeeds or fails by how well it communicates the message up and down and across the line. If the message comes down the line clearly, it can go back up the line clearly. If it doesn't, then there's a stumbling block. So it's really important to build rapport with your teammates and your bosses so that they can understand where you're coming from when you say, well, I'm not sure that that's going to work. Think about it. And so that they trust your judgment. And you can tell them, no, it's not going to work that way. I recommend we do this, which is different. Rather than them just dismissing that, no, we've got to do this. We have to do this. I'm telling you, that way is not going to work. This is the better way of doing something. That's when rapport is vital. But that's where, having got that rapport, the need to be quite as blunt without filters is lessened, because you've understood, and you and your boss understand each other. And when you say, no, it's not going to work that way, he's not going to just railroad you and say, we have to do it this way. But I've just told you it's not going to work. And if you need to then be stronger in the recommendation, you can do that because you've built up the rapport. Filters, fabulous thing that catches out autistic people and other people. It's not just neurodivergent people who can struggle with filters. Like I said, I know many people throughout my construction industry career who were very blunt, and I'm pretty sure that they were not neurodivergent. So it's something that we need to be aware of. And it was my boss's boss in my first company was a very blunt man. Eventually, you built a rapport up with them so that if you would ask a question, you say, no, I don't recommend doing that. We ought to try this way. He's going to understand and take note that your input, your answer is important, and you're not just saying it to be difficult. And he needs to understand that pursuing this the way that you're currently going isn't going to be successful. So we need to look at other ways of doing something that can only come by rapport. That's where not having filters can be a problem until you get experience and people understand. Actually, when you've asked him that and he said, no, I need to listen, need to pay attention. So filters are a double-edged sword. They can really get someone's back up, particularly your partner, if they've cooked you a nice meal and you don't like it, or they've just bought a nice outfit and you think, oh, it doesn't really fit you well here around this part of your body, or that doesn't go down very well. And I have fallen foul of that many times. So filters, be aware that your autistic and neurodivergent employees can be very blunt. And unless You preface your question by saying, I want you to think about what your response before you give it to me. That be signaling to the autistic person that they might need to just review their language and how blunt they are. Sometimes you still need to be blunt. Sometimes the only way to get your point across is to be blunt, but be prepared to back it up. So that was me talking about filters, and it's something that often gets overlooked because what they actually see is the blunt autistic person. Oh, they're digging their heels again. They're being obstreperous. They're being difficult, when actually they have a genuine concern about what is being done, and I'm not recommending you do it this way without thinking about it first or thinking about alternatives. So if you have an autistic person who's being blunt, think very carefully before you dismiss that as just oh God, they're being difficult again. Look into it more. Ask more specific questions. When you get the blunt answer, say, okay, can you tell me why you think that's going to happen if we proceed in this way? Explain it to me so that I can understand it. Give open questions so that they have to give you more detailed answer rather than closed questions. So if you want to get more out of your autistic employees and you've had the blunt response and you're not sure that you can take it forward quite in that way, ask more open questions and encourage them to be more descriptive about the nature of why they've said what they've said in quite the way that they have done. That's a really valuable tool that that supervisors and managers can use to try and get behind that first immediate response. And sometimes you need to do that to be able to understand why they've said what they've said. So that's about all we have time for this week on Talking Asperger's with Andrew. Keep a lookout tomorrow for when I'll be posting the video of this on my YouTube channel. Please feel free to look at all the videos for my Talking Asperger's with Andrew webinars. The YouTube channel has every single webinar on it. There's bound to be something there that is a benefit for you, your business, or if you just want to know a little bit more about managing Asperger's syndrome in whatever capacity it is that you encounter it. And on Friday, I'll be posting what next week's topic will be. Don't know yet. I've got to have a think about that. And if you are an employer and you're looking at this on replay or on YouTube and you're thinking, do you know what? I think I need to know a little bit more about how to manage Asperger's syndrome. Please feel free to get in touch. My website is above my shoulder there, aspergersmatters.com, and there's a contact form on there. Please feel free to use it. I'd be delighted to have a free 30-minute consultation with you to see how I can help you manage Asperger's syndrome in your workplace and how to do it better. Or you can email me at andrew@aspergersmatters.com. Thanks all for this week. Take care, look after yourselves, and I'll see you next week.